back live now, and before we take the first question, perhaps I'll invite our panelists just to offer their initial thoughts on what they've heard. Brian, how about you?
Yeah, I think some of what Craig was saying was really, really good. I would think that the support that we've had recently from our suppliers has been second to none. Our local procurement departments and our national procurement departments have been doing a fantastic job where we've had any shortages at all, and it's not all been on food. I would have to say they've been trying to outsource alternative supplies. So, there have been some difficulties. But from a food perspective, we've had hardly any. The food chain has kept moving. It's been excellent. Crisis management, we touched on that briefly. It's something that we do as caterers anyway, every day in life. So a lot of caterers are used to working in environments that are quite volatile in some areas, especially from staffing perspectives. But from what I'm hearing around Scotland, it has been particularly well managed. Interested to hear if Phil can give us any more information on the food review. Everybody's been waiting on that coming out.
I'm sure we'll have a few questions.
Obviously the government are they've got a lot of things on their plate right now. Yeah. I mean, if it's ready to go to print, then hopefully that'll be happening quite soon. But a lot of what Craig was saying, I would totally back up.
Excellent, Andy, your thoughts?
Well, I think it's a couple of thoughts really. I suppose on with regard to food supply, the one thing I can say is that there wouldn't have been a wholesaler within the UK that would have a problem of having stock in their warehouses when everything stopped. We all had food, and on the areas of the fresh products that we were distributing, we made a very conscious decision that we would prioritise NHS care homes and those elements within our society that we deemed as being vulnerable, including people within prisons, etc., that had no choice of having food coming from any one area. I do believe we're going to go through a major area of change, particularly in this sector. There's no question of a doubt about that. I think that the COVID endemic has really made us sit up and think about what crisis management is all about. I have to say, as an individual, I have been very disappointed in the lack of recognition for our frontline caterers, who have been equally as exposed as many of the support teams within the NHS and our nursing homes, and have done a terrific job. And I think that it's been undervalued and underplayed a lot, both in the press and around the marketplace. Unless you're working within the NHS, and certainly my wife has a medical background, and certainly she's very conscious of the importance of the support by the caterers within particularly the NHS, and feeding those staff who are often working 18, 19 hours a day. With regard to outsourcing, I do believe again that the government will start to think very seriously about the provision of services within the NHS, and also with the provision of sub-services of those elements around it that support all care of the nation, including nursing homes. So there will be a change there. Whether it'll drive more outsourcing, I don't know. I would suspect that it'll drive a higher compliance of standard and an expectation that an organisation can be accountable for the services they're offering. Thank you.
Okay. Gail, the point that Andy made there about the recognition of the role that caterers play, what do you think might be a sort of one way of helping to sort of raise that profile and get that recognition?
Well, I think it was a great point, although I would counter it with the fact that YouGov have put out some information saying that actually recognition for caterers, hospitality, delivery drivers, these people now essentially are minimum wage to frontline people. I think there's actually been, their recognition of them is higher than ever. We've had caps for NHS staff, but we've equally had people paying for people's food, delivery drivers having big thank yous and people putting up posters in their windows. So I think actually in the broader sense, there is recognition of the work that people do, and they recognise that when everybody else sat at home watching Netflix, these people were out there working, and we needed them to work, and they were quite amazing. So I come to that slightly. I think there is recognition for it, and I think that as we come out of lockdown, our job now as communicators is really to keep that pressure up, and to use this opportunity now to really escalate that and keep that status really high with the general population, but also with caterers within their own organisations, really engaging with stakeholders, chief executives, and making sure that this message that food is part of the medicine is out there and that it's funded.
Okay, thank you. Phil?
Yeah, I must say, I thought it was a superb overview from Craig. I thought he managed to cover a dozen topics amazingly, so well done, both of you, for doing that. I think what Craig has told us is where we are now, and it is a different situation to anything probably any of us have ever faced. But I think what he picked up on is where we need to be, and he's just started to plant a few seeds on where we could go. And of course, most importantly, is how we can do it. Of course, part of the review's task will be to do that. But we've also got things like the food standards that will be coming out shortly after that. And we've also got some great work that's going on throughout the association anyway. So what we mustn't forget is all the different streams that are going on to help things move forward. What I am very wary of is that we are waiting for something, and I always say to people, on our visits, we haven't just spoken to managers, we've spoken to every type of role, and every role we've spoken to, they're all leaders. They're all people that actually drive change. And I think it's important for us to recognise that, leaders have got a desire to make a change, and it's, most of the time Fresh fortunately is positive. Some of the areas that we went to, you could just see they were burning for us to be there, for them to share what they're doing, and for how they can help us going forward. And before we go into anything, I just want to say, both Gail and Craig were on the review panel, and I have to say, on behalf of the HCA, they represented the association absolutely brilliantly. Their commitment was faultless, and I can't thank them enough.
Okay, thank you. Right, well, as the point of the exercise today is, as well as sort of giving ourselves a chance to look back at what's happened, is to see what has happened and how that might affect what happens in the future. We've got a question from a lady called Gladys Yunusa from Bournemouth, and she's wondering about some of the barriers to meal times and meal preparation that have been overcome over the last 3 months and have made a difference, and how we can sort of draw lessons from where these challenges have been overcome and use them in the future. Brian, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it has been a huge challenge, especially where we've had COVID patients in wards. Some of our sites, we're moving into the 21st century. We've got single occupancy rooms. That was the way that they decided to move, and that in itself brings challenges. You might have a ward with 22 single rooms, and every patient's got to be fed, and at some point somebody's got on and off, go into that room to feed them a meal or give them a meal. That has been a huge challenge. It's delayed service at ward level, and in particular where we might have had, especially in some of the new builds, single room occupancy, but they've perhaps created a separate area for everybody to sit and socially integrating. So the food service end is away from the rooms, and we're not geared up. We maybe don't have the proper trolley service. If it's a bulk service, it's delayed further. It's brought up quite a number of challenges actually, and certainly in my own areas, we're starting to now review the types of equipment that we've got, the staffing levels, because whereby there's maybe an expectancy that falls on facility staff, and previously it's sitting with nursing colleagues. It's when they're having their breaks during meal times. It's been quite a challenge, and it's an interesting one, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned. Certainly that's within my area. I'm sure others will have various degrees of similarity.
Okay, thank you. Got a couple of sort of nuts and bolts style questions now. Helen Westwood from the Sheffield Teaching Hospital, and she's also the HCA branch secretary for the Trent region. She's looking for recommendations for any particular style of mask to wear that's suitable for food-safe environments. Craig, maybe you could just help us out there. Is there any sort of recommendations on this?
Okay, I think that the safest way, because I'm not an expert on this and I have to hold my hand up to it, but the safest way is that we, as an association, should be acting as the conduit to get out the advice from the four nations health boards like NHS England, NHS Scotland and so forth. We have been working very closely in making sure that as many of our people as need them are getting the proper PPE, but I'm not aware of anything which is specific to the food service. But what I am have been reminded of very recently, and Brian has been talking about this as well, this in a central production unit at the moment, it is an extremely high risk area for the delivery of service, because if somebody with this track and trace is being told to go and self-isolate because they've been in contact with somebody, that could affect an entire catering department, and the complete service could be locked down. So it's something that we need to be taking extremely seriously. But I would come back to the advice from NHS England, NHS Improvement is based upon the science, and so that's where we should leave it.
Okay, thank you. And there was another one here. Yeah, someone asking about whether the HCA is going to issue any guidance for retail outlets within hospitals on what could be sold. They say it seems a bit confusing. Should people be allowed, as it says, sandwiches, should we serve them or let customers choose them, for instance, is one of the sort of the dilemmas they face. Phil?
Yes. Well, yeah, I think it's very difficult for us to start to dictate what retail will sell. Well, I just want to pick up on some of those challenges. And of course, as caterers in the hospital sector, a lot of our retail almost shut down as soon as COVID was upon us. There were major staffing issues with our outlets, and therefore they shut down because, one, they weren't prepared, like all of us, for the circumstances. There were major staffing issues. So to help get things back on track, we've had to look at obviously our screening and our separation and our masks, and we use the FFP2s through NHSI, and it generally works. What I would say is that the relationships that we want hospitals to have with their retail sectors in healthcare is very, very important. And for me personally, we've tried to have a solid foundation. So whether you're commercial or you're private or you're public sector, you're all working together, you're all serving the same people, and therefore you try and find the best solutions. Our exec and our boards expect us to lead on the key topics that we're responsible for. And it's been fascinating. I've never seen so many men wash their hands before. This COVID has really refreshed us about safety and about hygiene. And again, I think Brian picked it up earlier. We're in a new situation now. We need to make the most of this remit about safety and the way we care for ourselves and the way we hand on that accountability, but by sharing space with each other. So, I mean, some of the suppliers, no doubt, that have linked in today, how they have managed to continue their food production, it must have been an absolute challenge, because in our own kitchens we've had to segregate, we've had to stagger meal breaks and just work very differently. And you're right, going forward, it is going to be different.
Okay, thank you. Andy, the suppliers, I think, were all geared up for the pandemic to bring in many more people into hospitals, maybe than turned out to be the case. I think people would be interested to know, first of all, what it's done to the supply chain and how you see going forward the gradual opening up of the way that hospitals work affecting supplies.
Well, first of all, with regard to the amount of people coming into hospital, we were very, very clear, having had lots of meetings, that particularly with the Nightingales, that as we started to open up, the requirement for food will be much more around just basic food rather than traditional hospital service. That was the first thing. And the second thing was that we were rapidly losing volumes, as the caterers were, as COVID patients were taking over the hospitals, and therefore the requirement of food started to shrink. So with regard to maintaining the volumes going forward, it wasn't too bad, in fairness. I mean, that was for us quite easy. I think the difference that we started to see was that lots of major manufacturers physically shut down, even some of the biggest ones. So therefore, depending on the kind of service that you had, would depend on what you could get. I mean, a great example would be someone like Coke, who are a terrific supplier into hospitality. They use an awful lot of post-mix in places like Kentucky Fried, Burger King, McDonald's, and so on and so forth. And immediately the supply volume plus the pubs stopped. So as a consequence, they stopped production of post-mix. So therefore, those caterers that were using a post-mix to service carbonated drinks suddenly found they weren't available because no one was manufacturing them in the volumes that we went through. The second and most difficult area for us was the immediate panic within the retail sector. And of course, the majority of our suppliers trade into both retail and into food service. And they immediately switched their production over to the retail to meet the demands of the major supermarkets. And so we were then in a scramble to try and get a like product. So what we were then doing was offering an immediate alternative in simple elements. For example, if Heinz baked beans weren't available, we were offering Cross and Blackwell. So this kind of gave many caterers additional work as they were then working on the nutritional standards of their menus and looking at the ingredient of the alternative that was being offered. But this only ran for a short period of time. In the main, supply worked well. British suppliers were superb, particularly the fruit and veg suppliers, who really did turn on and turn around very quickly. I know many of them were working virtually 24/7. Even though they were experiencing very, very high levels of waste, they were still giving us full service across the ranges we were offering. The hardest element, I would say, was sitting within those clients that were buying PPE, where we would stock that, as well as specialist operators. And as we were buying out of places like China, who were still producing the major volumes, they were literally talking to major operators like ourselves and putting us into a bidding war. So we may have 5 containers on order. We would get a phone call from them saying, well, actually, a German wholesaler has just offered 20% more. If you will pay 20% more, we will ship you. If not, you'll have to go back to the back of the list. And we found that uncomfortable and not particularly good. That was the negative. The positive is we operate a business out of China as well. So we just got our Chinese division to buy the product, and then they shipped it out to us. So therefore, it managed to keep our supply going. I do want to answer the question on face masks, because we have the benefit of having businesses across the world, and this area has been brought forward. And I also had a note for Andy Jones with regard to this, and the effect of face masks in a kitchen environment, particularly the effect that humidity has on it, and how long it will last. And I don't believe that we can get material that will take away that humidity and the effect of that face mask being as effective as possible. And I think the only thing we're going to start to move towards, or should move towards, will be the frequency of change. So therefore, I'm certain that when people dig into this with greater knowledge, where there may be a recommendation to change the product every 4 hours, I think what we'll start to see for the caterer, specifically in the kitchen environment, is to reduce this 4 hours to 2 or less. I don't believe that we will see different products being produced to enable us to use that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Gail, picking up on the point that you actually made about perhaps the need to start cranking up the PR now that the sort of the first wave, if you like, of panic seems to have died down a little bit. I mean, a couple of people have come in with questions on this, talking about sharing the good news and thanking our teams publicly, and someone else making the point that it would be nice to do this beyond just saying they're everyday heroes. What do we do to raise their importance and value?
I think the first thing to say is that during a crisis, and certainly a global pandemic is definitely categorised as one of those, the first thing you do is you have to stop communicating, you have to stop advertising, and you have to look at what you're saying. Is it tone deaf in the current environment? And in fact, many of the campaigns would have been. So it's really important to stop that, to make sure that you're not seen to be capitalising or actually capitalising on a tragedy, or not reflecting the right situation. As we've come through lockdown, we're starting to emerge now. Now's a really good time to actually start messaging internally within the organisations and within hospitality, but also further than that. So, for example, if you look at the NHS as a brand, it has never, ever had such high status. The goodwill that it has achieved in this period is you couldn't purchase this. The loyalty, the engagement, the ownership. So we call that brand equity. And if you look at people talking, they're saying things like our NHS, we own the NHS. And that is a really good opportunity for caterers and suppliers now to do some real good. So from the caterer side of things, I think there's an opportunity to take that goodwill and take it to their chief execs, take it to the government, take it to their trust and say, and we need to be funded. It's also a good opportunity to raise their own status within their trust and again promote the fact that food is medicine and it's critical. On the supplier front, we've got brands knocking on our door saying, how do we connect with the NHS? How much will it cost? We want to do this. So all the suppliers out there, you've already been working with the NHS, you have that equity. And now's the time to start communicating, partners with the NHS for 25 years. We've supplied the NHS for 20 years. We're here. We're still in business. We're proud to be part of the NHS. And there's a really good narrative that can come out of this lockdown. And it couldn't have happened earlier. We have to do things in the right time and the right space. And I think what Andy was saying there, and Phil, there's a good opportunity, I think, your restaurants, well, not your restaurants, but your services have been open. So I think something we might look to do, Craig, is to actually case study that and help share with the rest of hospitality how you've operated. I think they'd be interested to see how social distancing has or hasn't worked, and what things they can take from that.
Okay, thank you. Phil, I'm going to have to come back to you on the food review. A number of people asking when we might see it and any insight at all that you can supply about what we might see in it. Is there anything you can help us with on that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the timing was cruel. There's no doubt about it. But when you bear in mind the situation, it was the right thing to do. Delay it to ensure that we have an impact at the right time, and so therefore the report needs to be suitable. And picking up on what Gail says right now is at the time we were waiting for the report and the political and the public support was there. However, I think it's there in greater strength now. So it is important that we get a launch, first of all. We decide on how we're going to implement it. And I firmly believe there will be a 2-year implementation plan so we can work with associations and our colleagues to actually help make the right decisions. We need funding. There's no doubt about it. What I don't want to do is say it's all about the money, because I don't believe it is. I think a lot of it is about the way we work in our establishments, but also with each other. We were so fortunate to see amazing hospital visits where, people were proud of what they do. And it's important that we're able to buddy up and learn from each other. So there needs to be a balance view. And I think what is likely that will happen, that the timing will be in a way that it will link to a spending review. So it's important that we can link into that and help the politicians realise, we need the money. This is what we need it for right now. But also over a 2-year period, we need a continual spend. And that not only helps the caterers, but it helps our suppliers, whether your food or your equipment. If when do I go and talk to caterers and procurers, and what do I talk to them about? Don't waste your time going to talk about something that is inappropriate. You want to know the topics that we're going to lead on, and therefore you can come in and open the doors and be there at the right time. So, yeah, it's difficult for me to say exactly when. I think it's highly unlikely now that it will be pre-summer. I think it will be very quickly after the summer, because that links into the October-November spending review. But it will be down to the Secretary of State. The report, although finished, we're having to work extremely hard and long nights to adapt it because of COVID. The report was written pre-COVID, but we cannot ignore what has happened. And we have to take that into consideration and learn from it. So we adapt it in a way that people can pick it up and know that it's fresh.
Okay, that's brilliant. Brian, I wanted to turn to you now. We've had several questions in, people asking, for instance, that the experience of reduced choice menus that have had to be instituted over the last 3 months, and someone else was made a point about the preference of service systems, perhaps a preference for plating meals as opposed to bulk serving on wards. Do you see things like that changing the way that hospital catering operates as we sort of move out of our the first 3 months of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Menu reduction hasn't happened everywhere, I would have to say. Menu reductions have probably been something that was maybe implemented right at the very beginning, where they thought there were going to be food shortages. Certainly, with my experience is we looked at it, and we considered menu reduction. One of the things that probably stopped us from doing it straight away was the background work that was going to be required by dietitians to make sure that we were going to meet nutritional needs of our clients, and how we were going to do that if we reduced the menu choice, and would the overall nutritional needs be sufficient. We did consider, obviously, that, as Andy had said, that the increase in public that was going to happen with COVID, we did see that happening in some of our hospital sites. In terms of food service and what's delivered to the patient, there's a lot of places do need, as Craig's picked up and Phil's already said, investment in catering departments and in food service delivery models is something that's really overdue. We've still got some hospital sites, and it's sad to say it, operating systems that were late 70s, early 80s, ambient trolleys serving hot food. The lack of investment is apparent, but now when you start to look at trying to get the money to do that, governments are telling you they've not got the money. So, as Phil was alluding to, we're starting to look now at a long-term plan. We've got 3, 5, 7-year plans now in place, and what we can do and what we're going to prioritise as replacing our food service models. And that was actually brought about because of part of the food review, part of what happened down in England in relation to listeria. Because in Scotland, many of us did go away and we reviewed our cold chain. We then looked at our hot chain as well. It was the first time. So we know where our areas are. We know the areas that require investment. It's getting that money, and it's made a priority. So sometimes it's those that scream loudest get it. The other thing that we're currently doing within Scotland is we're also reviewing production units because of lack of investment. We're currently modelling up what we would look like if we had maybe 3 or 4 central production units across the whole of Scotland to deliver a cook freeze model. Now that in itself brings with it a lot of angst within caterers. But we have got areas within Glasgow that have got 2 freeze models. When you do that kind of modelling, you're then looking at the service delivery at ward automatically has to change because you need to look at regeneration type trolley systems. So I think there's still a wee bit off yet. There is no magic wand. Money is going to be at the forefront at any time.
Brian, I'm sorry, but we're sort of reaching the end of our hour now, and I probably need to start wrapping things up. But I wanted to say thank you, everyone, today for taking part. Craig, Phil, Brian, Gail, and Andy. We have to remind you now that there will be a link to the full recording of this webinar available on Monday from the Public Sector Catering website. The next one of our The Future of Your Food Service webinars takes place on July the 2nd, when Matthew White, Chair of TUCO, will join us to look at higher education.